Hello, everyone. I'm Jeremy Schiff. I'm a project manager out of Lids Consulting's Toronto office. Specialty is warehouse design, process optimization, and network studies. I'm joined here today by Waleed Usman and Ryan Barrett from North American Steel. And the topic we're going to be discussing is successful project setups. So, when you're building a new facility or designing a new facility, how do you set up the project so that it goes smoothly and that you don't have any unnecessary hiccups? Waleed, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. I'm Waleed Usman. I've been with the company North American Steel for about 7 years right now, and I've been working as a director of projects at my position in Whitby, which is the head office for North American Steel. We have three plants in eastern Canada and three plants in western Canada, and we do tend to travel frequently as well. And my part of the portfolio is I have to manage a large, medium, and even small scale projects at most of the times for different type of customers, coast to coast in Canada as well as in the United States as well.
Great. Your turn, Ryan.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Ryan Barrett. I've been with North American Storage, and that's what we call our partnership out west here with North American Steel, where Waleed is. And I've been with the company for 15 years. I've been in the racking industry for 20 plus years, so a lot of experience going around there. I've done in sales. Currently, the branch manager here in Calgary, where we carry the finished goods and products that we like to ship out. Whereas we have our plant in Nisku, and where Waleed is out in Whitby and also in Colborne, where more of the raw material is done. But where I am in Calgary, we deal with the finished product, where we try to quick ship material out the door as quick as we can. And yeah, been here for a very long time and enjoyed it.
Glad to hear that. So let's dive into the project topic. So setting up a project successfully, for our purposes, we're focusing on kind of making sure the racking portion is successful, making sure that there's no hiccups there. So I guess the first topic to discuss is who are the different parties that we think are involved or that would be impacted by racking, and who needs to be brought in? Who are all the different stakeholders that should be involved in the discussion?
Basically, when we are starting the project, most of the cases we are working with either consultants or the customers directly. As the more add-ons comes in the project, or the customers are requesting us to collaborate, partner up with such as different companies, lab engineers, some of the times sprinkler or electrical teams as well, which is very rare, but there can be an opportunity where they can request us to get some information or collaborate with them as well. Only that time, but most of the about 95% of the time, we're working exclusively with the customers, clients, or the consultants. As much as we want to be involved at the very early stages, so we can guide the customer on what type of product, and just the consultants do, and what particular solution that we present them can be useful in different ways in a one common warehouse building, it becomes very challenging for them to do it. Because at the beginning, they're mostly thinking about the budget pricing, they're mostly thinking about the budgetary designs, high level estimates. They're not so much concerned too deeply on how the building might actually look like after 2 years when they might be doing the handover, commissioning, and all that. The additional parties, such as the installation people, the general contractor, logistic teams, from us internally, from the manufacturing and all that, we normally are keeping them aside. However, when we are beginning the project with the customers and the consultants, what we like to do is advise them of different things, even risks that can approach. Let's say, for instance, for us as steel manufacturer as well, if the steel pricing or market escalation goes up or down, how will that get affected to the type of the designs that they are planning? If, for instance, the freight pricing, which we saw during the COVID as well, went up, nobody really thought about that while we will be proposing some of these solutions. How can that aid or how can that make modification as well? So such instance, I feel like will be super helpful for the customer and how we might be able to help them out with that as well.
Just touch on kind of where we get through to into the municipalities and kind of how they somewhat force our hand to reach out to different groups, whether it's through the architect or or, through the groups directly in regards to getting a drawing or a layout that is acceptable by the local municipality for the building permits that are necessary nowadays. So, incorporating the sprinkler engineer, the slab on grade engineer, the electrical engineer in regards to emergency lighting, fire alarms, those type of precursor early work can really get you ahead on the design, making sure that you have full understanding of your limitations within a building, or what you can actually expand and do more within a building based on maybe a slab load, or maybe the sprinkler system might need an upgrade and you're able to do more with that building. So when we try to incorporate all those parties, if we can get through those challenges early, we're able to give a lot more concise quote or layout or opportunity for the customer to see the potential for a building they might be looking at.
Okay. Yeah, in my experience, so when we've dealt with either greenfield designs or when we are putting racking into an existing space, typically who we deal with at LID is we deal with the customer, and then we deal with the architect. So those are the first people brought in. They do like a big box design, right? They don't know details, just like this is the overall footprint. This is kind of the different rooms that are going to be in the space. And then we go from there. I would say at that point is typically when we first start thinking about, well, what's the racking going to look like in the space? And to my mind, that's when it would that would make sense. Once you've selected the architect, then you might bring in at the same time, the racking vendor, such as North American Steel, and the general contractor, if it's not a design build, because the racking design is going to heavily impact different parts of the architectural design and going to heavily impact cost elements. So it's important for the general contractor when they're providing the budget, it's important for them to know what the racking is going to look like. And it's important for the racking vendor to know, well, how tall is the building going to be? Where roughly is the column placement going to be? Which rooms are refrigerated? Which rooms are not refrigerated? Which rooms are going to have condensation in them, so they require galvanized steel, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's kind of once you have set the kind of high level design with the architect, once we have set the high level design with the architect and with the customer, that is when we would bring in both the general contractor to start working on kind of more details, working on their production budget, on their construction budget, and then we would bring in North American Steel to say, like, this is the space, this is kind of the racking that we're thinking of. What do you think? What are your recommendations? And then we'd go from there.
I would like to actually add on to one of the things that I love the way you approached based on the architect's mind and also the customer's mind, because customer, even though he might have a high level idea of how the business trajectory looks like, they might not really know if they really need like a 1 million square feet building versus they might actually be okay with like going with 100 or 200,000 square feet, depending on the type of the inventory that they want to manage in their whole supply chain network. And when you guys are working as well, along with later on bringing us, it actually takes away half of the information missing in the very beginning of the process. The customers normally will reach out to us later on. So for instance, you mentioned very directly, such as even post loads. They might actually select a building whose slab is not sufficient enough to hold the capable loads that they're thinking of placing in, only to finding that when they have finalized everything, the leases are signed, now all of a sudden they realize, well, we actually have 30,000 pounds coming to on one single leg, but the building that we actually signed the lease for can only take 20 to 25,000 pounds. Well, now we're going to miss out on all that inventory that we could have taken the maximum height advantage of, which now is obviously too late. So I love the way you approach that as well.
And I think also too, like, Jeremiah, when you say about the architect, a lot of times our layouts are forced by the hand of egresses. So if we were dealing with a large building or we're dealing in an area where, we've got to meet that local or that, bylaw or that code where the egress is to get out of the building for fire code is putting us in a position where tunnels have to be put in certain places, their doors going in certain areas. So our column positions in the right place so we are able to keep lines of sight for doors. Are we able to utilize fire-rated corridors or, breaks into the office buildings where they've got a fire-rated drywall? A lot of times if we're able to, propose a layout and a lot of those egresses and those issues that are really non-negotiable by the municipalities unless you pass them, If we can get ahead with the design on that and show some of the complications or some of the ease in regards to having the racking in certain locations, can be extremely beneficial for an end product as well.
Yeah. I think that's the most important thing about when we talk about successful project setup. It's, you don't want to bring the racking. I think we wouldn't want to bring you in before we even have an idea of what the built space would look like, because there's no real point at that. It's too, at that point, the open space of the open design space is too large. There's no point in trying to meet it. But once you have an idea of, okay, we're looking for a building of roughly this size, or roughly you can store this much product, that at that point we would bring the racking vendor in, and that would be the successful point, because beforehand they don't, it's too much, it's too open. There's not, you want a more defined problem to solve. If we bring you in afterwards, though, so let's say we went through we hired the architect, we hired the general contractor, they got their budget, and then we bring the racking vendor, and then you say, oh wait, you forgot, there's all these conflicts. You forgot to think about the clear height. You forgot to think about the sprinkler system. You forgot to think about if it's a refrigerated space. You forgot to think about where the condensers are going to be located. You forgot to think about egresses and tunnel systems and all sorts of things. So that's why, for a successful project, to make sure that you maximize the design and you don't have too many trade-offs down the road, it's important to bring you in fairly early.
Exactly. One key point to add on that as well, that even though we love to come early, at times, as I mentioned, the best part or the most ideal location where we can come early would be when we have tangible information that we can put stuff down to, where we can concretely lay down the type of the system that they're looking for. For the most of the items that we are seeing right now, whenever the building is a rack supported in that instance, or the new ASRS systems, or anything that has to do with the automation sector, and the customers wants us to work with the automation companies or collaborate with them in making sure their system and our system are lining up, they're bringing us head in the table as well, because they want to understand that how can we make this particular system work? Because in that case, there are no building columns. In that case, there are no specific even lighting, because in that automated system, you don't necessarily have people going in and out, no manual operations happening. So the team can tend to away, other than just the regular egress lights, you might not necessarily need a lot of those items, as opposed to using them for the regular manual static racking. So those are the opportunities where we are seeing to be called in much ahead of time, even presenting some high level layout designs, the elevations, and how they're going to look like, and how we will be able to work with the customer to at least get some sense of where that's going. So just wanted to actually add that to you as well on that discussion.
Part of the topic of discussion, one of the topics, but I was thinking it might be interesting if you guys have a minute, if you have any examples of bad project setups, so where you were brought in too late and the trade-offs that happen, or the problems that happen because of it.
I wish I would say that there were none, but unfortunately there are a few. I'll just provide one of the most recent one that we did for one of the customer who was building out actually their head office location. What the customer did was, again, we got called in pretty late in the game. And when we started working on their demountable mezzanines and demountable pick tower and storage options and providing for the small parts distribution center, we realized that if the option that they would tend to going with for the structural mezzanine, they never really counted for the post loads that actually will be coming on the floor. So we had, for the mezzanine, we had nearly about 40 different column locations, and to core drill the existing slab to add more concrete and strength, to actually add more footings to support the additional post load requirement, the cost was going astronomical high, and they hadn't even considered how much the top structure would have cost realistically at that time. I'm talking a little bit closer towards in the mid of COVID, where things were really skyrocketing up and down, and nobody had any idea where the industry will land into. So what we ended up being going with was providing a rack supported and a shelf supported system. What that did was it distributed the post load not only in one leg in an overall wider span, but through multiple legs. So with that, they no longer needed a requirement to having footings in. And that was, again, a lesson learned from the customer's perspective as well, to why was it critical to at least understand the after requirement of putting a storage system on the building.
One issue I've seen fairly recently actually was, I talked about refrigeration. The client had not considered, when they were thinking about racking, they hadn't considered where the condensers were going to be stored or were going to be located. So they're like, oh, that racking is going to be it's going to be a clear height to 40 feet. Well, I'll be able to put in this many pallet positions. And then we found out that in the freezer space, the location of the condensers was going to make the top level of basically half the racking unusable. Just in the places where they were located, because either it was going to be in front of the rack and blocking access, it was going to be on top of the rack, and so that the levels had to be lowered, or where it wasn't directly where the condensers were not directly blocking the rack, they would still be in danger of if a reach truck was lifting a pallet to that height, they would bang into it, and we didn't want to even chance that, or the customer didn't want to chance that because they've had bad experiences. So we ended up having to take out a full full level of pallets for basically the entire freezer system.
I mean, a classic example, the same thing. Speaking of the lift truck, some of the customers we have had, they actually signed up a lease, came to us, we did the layout design and everything, and we do normally ask them to provide all the specs of the lift trucks and everything that they have, only to end up again, because COVID really was the worst of the worst time where businesses were trying to flourish and they were trying to sustain as well. I don't think so they were able to get the lift truck spec that they had provided us at the very beginning of the stages, only to end up getting something else. And for the whole system, the very top level in that 40 feet clear building that we had placed were rendered useless to them because the lift truck just couldn't reach to that specific height. So, and exactly that refrigeration system issue, we have seen that with many 3PLs who are going through transformation, depending on what type of customer will be coming in and out. We have had them building up a whole wall only to realize, oh, where now the refrigeration will go? You know what, like we might actually would have to take this whole racking down and maybe put a refrigeration system over there. That issue to 3PLs, I mean, they're basically charging per pallet costs over there. So that is a lost revenue, which is very critical. So, but we have again have customers. So the first warehouse is the worst one, or I'm going to say like the most lessons learned. And the next one, they keep on gradually getting better and better.
We can move on to managing multiple vendors. So I know that the dream is always that you have the space to yourself, right? You go in, you have an empty, clean building, you build the racking, you have no one in your way. Sometimes that happens. I've seen many cases where that doesn't happen. I've seen cases where, yes, the customer is not in the building yet, but the general contractor is still working on pieces, or the automation supplier is going to be building conveyor systems around the space while the racking is being built. So there's the issues like that. I've also seen examples where the customer is already occupying some of the space, so you have to put up the racking while there's already the customer in another part of the building, and the people and product is getting in the way. So what are your views on what's the best way to manage that? What's the best way to plan it out, and the communication systems that should be set up so that you're able to put the racking in with minimal amount of conflict with the other vendors or with the customer on site?
I think that you answered in one word the very last point, the communication. We have always had issues with either customer stakeholders or the parties who are involved, the general contractor, or even, unfortunately, one of our team members not being able to clearly communicate. We've had the issues with respect to, let's say, the team member, the shipping team, delaying providing information to the installation team that what truck, let's say, for instance, might have some specific type of hardware that they'll be looking at. It hasn't happened frequently, but let's say there happens to be a hypothetical scenario that could happen. Because of that, the installation team is unaware of how they have to approach. To begin the process with, we ideally, again, as you said, we love to come in a greenfield building where the building already has been handed over to the customer and nobody's there, and we love to work in. But we have obviously been working in the buildings where the operations are happening live. In that case, we're cordoning off the facility putting safety fencing, working with the health and safety team of the customer on site pretty much on a daily basis to understand were there any issues, are there any risks for the next activities that we are planning. We're doing actually massive relocations, reconfigurations right now as we are speaking with many different customers. And one of the main priority for them is the health and safety. I mean, which is the actually priority for them. They don't mind delaying the project, but that obviously should never come at the expense of any type of health hazards that it can pose. There was one point in time, I'll give an example, where we had to do some overhead work, and there were workers picking just about 5 feet away from where we were dismantling the racking, and also we were doing some of the rework in that area. We had to wait for about a 2-week time to go back and complete that portion just because the health and safety team didn't allow it, and the work that was left out was just about 2 or 3 days worth of work. So whenever that comes in, the health and safety obviously plays a main part. The second, the main critical item is when we're going inside the building, and let's say there is a general contractor available, you have to abide by the guidelines and the rules that are set up by the general contractor at that point, even though we have been brought in by the customer, or let's say the customer is the main stakeholder, which we have been working with, and we were not being made aware that there will be a general contractor. So that adds up a little bit more extra work for us. We have to do orientations. We again have to do all the additional items that normally we would have to deal with. For instance, in COVID, there was one of the main things that people had to even get vaccinated to work inside different type of buildings. So that was a request and a requirement, not from the customer, but that came from the site superintendents who was working for different companies. That did pose a lot of challenge for us because we were never made aware of that. So that ended up delaying the project for about a good chunk of time, but only at a different part of the expense.
Yeah. One thing I would say, besides communication, I think even though customers often don't like hearing it, when you have multiple vendors or teams working in the same general space, is not being not requiring a very tight schedule, not creating a very tight schedule. So I've had projects where we created a schedule, so the racking vendor was going to be in the space for 2 weeks, and that was exactly the time they needed, and then the automation vendor was going to go in right after, and they were going to be 2 weeks, and then the general contractor was going to go in, and they were going to be exactly 2 weeks. We made it sure it was very tight, so in and out, because our customer wanted to have that space as soon as possible. And then, of course, it took more than 2 weeks. The racking vendor took 3 weeks, and then the automation vendor took 4 weeks, and to push everything out. And if that had been known ahead of time, if we had put in that buffer ahead of time, it would have been a lot better, because what happens is the automation vendor, they're preparing their equipment, they're preparing their team, they're preparing their schedule to what you said. You said they'll be on site January 3rd. They're planning to be on site January 3rd. They're renting their equipment, and they're setting their team, they're setting their resources so that they'll be on site January 3rd. And now you're telling them a week later, they may charge you for that. And the general contractor, they may charge for that, or they may not be available. They may say, well, we have we were planning to be on site for 3 weeks or 2 weeks, but that was based on starting at a certain time, and we have another project after this. So if we need to extend their time or delay their time, they may say, well, we're not available for another month because we have another project, so we'll see you in a month. So that's why I think, besides communication, when you're dealing with multiple vendors, it's the realization that you can't have as tight a timeline, and you need to put a lot more buffer into the project schedule than you would have if you just have one vendor in that space and they're just doing the work themselves. And that's because any vendor, any person working in that space may have an issue, or they may do something which is going to change the project schedule. Mm-hmm. And if you have no buffer, it's going to push everyone, and it's going to create huge downstream issues in the schedule. So you need to put that buffer in so that it can eat up any additional time at any portion of the work is taken up by that buffer, and it doesn't actually push out the timeline. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time today. So I had a great time discussing this with you, and have a great rest of the day.